I'm here in my makeshift player piano workshop, if you want to call it that. I just mean the one available corner of my garage. I'm working on the lower bellows assembly, and I thought that while I have one of the exhauster bellows completely finished and the other one just getting started, it'd be a good time to stop and sort of show you what I'm doing and how this all works. So the lower bellows assembly is in effect the lungs of a player piano. A player piano runs on vacuum, drawing from a source of vacuum or low air pressure. And that source of vacuum is this very large bellows, which thankfully is the largest in a player piano. This is called the reservoir, and I think sometimes you'll see it called the trunk, if I'm not mistaken, but I call it the reservoir. That's where the vacuum is stored, but to generate that vacuum, you need these two bellows. They are called, depending on what you read or who you're talking to, they're either called the exhauster bellows or the treadle bellows. I tend to call them the exhauster bellows.
Some folks call it a sling blade. I call it a guider blade.
And if you're familiar with how to operate a player piano, you know that there is a secondary set of pedals, technically treadles, that come out from the knee panel that the pianolist will operate with his or her feet, and that will generate the vacuum to run the instrument. And while you're operating the pedals, what you're actually doing is driving these two fellas right here, the exhauster bellows. The way that it works is that these will be screwed into the back of the reservoir in this orientation. And as the bellows opens, there is a leather flap valve here that prevents this bellows from drawing air from the atmosphere. Therefore, the only place from which it can draw air is on its other side, and that takes air out of the reservoir, lowers the air pressure therein, and generates a supply of vacuum. There is another set of valves that I will attach not to this piece, but to the corresponding face of the other piece, the back of the reservoir. There's another set of flap valves, that will attach there that prevent air from going backwards into the reservoir after you've drawn it out with these bellows. So in effect, the flap valves give you a unidirectional airflow. It can only go one way, and that's out of the reservoir. So first of all, I've stripped the old paint off of this piece. This was originally manufactured in 1928, 2024 now, so this paint is 96 years old. I still have paint on this side, which I'm yet to strip off. I don't know if you can tell from your perspective, but it looks pretty horrible up close, and it definitely needs to be repainted. Now this piece is inside the lower part of the piano. You never see it unless you open it up, but I'm one of those people where if it doesn't look great, even if I can't see it, I'll know that it doesn't look great and it'll drive me nuts. So the first thing to do is to cut off the old bellows cloth. Before you do that, you need to measure the span of the bellows so that you know exactly how far apart these boards are to be when the cloth is fully extended. I happen to know that the span of these bellows is 4 1/4 inches, and I have this little block cut that's 4 1/4 this way and 4 this way, so that I can also use it for something else, and that will help me to set the correct span of the bellows when I go to recover them. Then I will need to strip all of the old cloth and glue and paint off of these two boards. They are connected together with a hinge that is made of the same cloth that I will cover the bellows with. I need to cut that hinge out, make a new one, which I've already made a new one. It will look just like so. I will take these wooden spacers off of here, clean them up and dress them and glue them back on. Their function here is only to protect the hinge cloth. Once the boards are rehinged, then it will be time to recover the bellows. And I'll give you a rough demonstration of how that operation goes, because it's sort of fun, I think. This is bellows cloth for large bellows and a player piano that I got from John Tuttle out of New Jersey, who operates Player Care, one of the last remaining suppliers in the United States of replacement parts and materials for player pianos. As you can imagine, it's a pretty niche market, but very glad that he's still around. He's supplied me with a lot of things I've used in this project. The leather for the flaps, all my bellows cloth, hide glue that I hope to show you in a minute if I don't forget. Anyway, you set your span to 4 1/4 inches, and I'll do it something like this. You want to glue the end of the bellows down first, something like so. Once that glue is set up, then you glue up the ends. So I'll glue that side, then glue this side, make sure that everything is tight, bonded well, then cut off all of the excess. And then you want to make sure that the creases are formed well and they look pretty and they're not wrinkled up in unnecessarily complicated ways. Here I would like to mention that I did not notice until I was rebuilding the second exhauster bellows that my creases in the cloth of the first were inverted. Here on the left is the first exhauster bellows, which is complete. The one on the right is the second, which was about half complete at this point, and it was at this time that I realized my mistake. You can see on the left that the cloth folds outward, while on the right it folds inward towards the middle of the bellows. Functionally, I don't know that it makes a difference, but traditionally the correct way to fold or crease the cloth is as is shown on the right, and I was able to correct this in the first exhauster bellows. After the bellows itself is recovered, then the external hardware needs to be reattached. I'll start with this huge spring that is on the side. As your foot on the treadle draws this bellows open, there needs to be some force to return it back to the closed position so that you can open it again. And that, of course, is accomplished by this huge spring. There's a lot of tension on these springs. They're very powerful, and if you're not careful with them when you're working, you can do some damage to yourself pretty badly. And I know that because I almost did. They can hurt you. This was originally painted solid black, and by the time I got a hold of it, when it was almost a century old, all of the paint had started to chip off. The steel underneath was rusting very badly. And I didn't want to repaint it the way that it was before because I didn't think it looked all that good and I didn't think it would last too long. Instead of repainting it, I blued it with gun bluing, same as you would put on a shotgun barrel. And I think that gave it a really nice character and color. And then I lacquered it with a metal lacquer so that it will hopefully be tarnish and corrosion free for several decades. This spring has two little fingers that curl in and insert into pre-drilled holes at the lower part of the side of these boards. And then it is held in place with these little brass, I think I would call them stirrups. When I first started, I wasn't even sure whether these were brass or not. They were so tarnished that they were almost black, but I suspected that they might be brass, so I ran them through my tumbler. I've run a lot of brass on this project, and almost all of it comes out looking great. I've been really pleased with how the brass comes out in the tumbler. But they went from black to a very beautiful brass color. Then I lacquered them also so that they would not corrode. Screwed them back in. Let's see, what else? Oh, I forgot to mention, identical to the strip of cloth that I put on the inside to hinge the two boards, I put another piece on the top to sort of cap everything off and make sure that it's airtight up here also. And I don't just do that because I feel like it, that's the way it was done in the original. Another supplementary piece of cloth that needs to be attached, and again, this is something that I think I'm sitting a little too far away from you to show you very well, but there are two little half-moon pieces of bellows cloth up here at the main coil of the spring. There's one here and one here. I imitated those because they were present in the original. They look just like this. I cut them from the same cloth that I put on the bellows. And all I can gather is that they are to protect the bellows cloth itself from being worn out and abraded by the main coil of the spring. So I placed them back exactly the way they were before. Another tiny little detail that I had to get right, involving a piece of cloth. Inside those little brass stirrups that I was just talking about, in the originals, there were these very small circular cups of cloth. I duplicated those as they were in the original, and that's just to provide a little bit of padding between the brass piece and the spring. I think that covers it for cloth and hardware. Then the flap needs to be reattached. Again, I cut this from a piece of quality leather that was supplied to me by John Tuttle. It's a really simple mechanism how this flap valve works, but I think it's kind of elegant. It's just tacked in. I've got it tacked in with brass tacks on this side. On the other end, it is glued with hide glue. Before I forget, I better say a word about that because I meant to. When you hear old folks talk about sending off a horse to be made into a glue, or sending the cow or the goat or what have you off to the glue factory, they're referring to this stuff, hide glue. And it really is made of animals, melted down hides and hooves and horns and so forth. And if I understand correctly, that is to extract the collagen, which is a main component of a lot of the binding tissues and sinews in animal bodies. And in a crystalline form, it makes an excellent glue. And that is the type of glue that was traditionally used in piano building for gluing wood to wood, wood to leather, cloth to wood. And I really have a lot of fun working with it. Most people that work with hide glue will use an electric glue pot, and that works just fine. But I really have a good time working out of this late 1800s, early 1900s fanner glue pot. It's not electric, of course. It's just two little cups that nest together. You fill the lower with boiling water, put the upper cup into the bowl, put your glue crystals in there, mix it in a little hot water, and then you've got workable glue for about half an hour until it cools down, and then you need to heat some more water up on the stove and the tea kettle and dump it in there, and then it softens up for you again. So I enjoy that. Anyway, that hide glue is used to glue this wooden block to a roughed up patch on this edge of the flap valve. And this wooden block has a spring tension applied to it by this little spring, which is screwed in here, and there's a little staple here to act as sort of a fulcrum to give it a little bit more leverage on the wood. And all that serves to do is to keep this flap valve flush up against the back of the bellows, so that when the bellows is opened, it cannot draw any air through here, because this flap valve is suctioned to the back of the bellows, which causes it to draw air from here, which lowers the air pressure in the reservoir, again, to generate a source of vacuum. I'll show you a little bit about how they go back together with the reservoir. They will screw back into the backside of the reservoir here. There are 8 screws in a 3x3 square minus the middle. And the same thing here, I will need to remake leather gaskets just as they were in the original to ensure that it is perfectly airtight. And I think that I will, at some later point, make another video specifically about how these screw together, because it made a fool of me. I think that's all I'll say about it for now, but it's really interesting. When it came to painting this one, I was an absolute perfectionist, and I think I drove my wife crazy, because I would paint it, I would be unhappy with it, sand it off, repaint it, didn't like it, sand it off and repaint it and so forth. And I did that about 6 times until I finally got a texture and a color that I liked. I originally painted it with General Finishes lamp black milk paint with a satin top coat. I didn't like that, sanded it off, repainted it again with lamp black and a dead flat top coat. I didn't like that, sanded it off. Eventually I settled on Sherwin-Williams tricorn black with a mixed in satin finish. I like that. And tricorn black is the blackest black paint that Sherwin-Williams makes. And I like the look of it that I've gotten here. And of course I still need to do that over on this side. So I've had a lot of fun with this, and I look forward to finishing out the rest of the lower bellows assembly, the lungs of a player piano, so that mine can breathe once again.